Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Today I rode my bike over to the historic Coast Guard station on St. Simon's Island. And when I get back to the house, I'm going to show you how to make individual apple galettes. This delicious combination of puff pastry, almond cream, and apples. And what's great is I'm going to show you how to make a quick and easy puff pastry. So we'll see you back at the house. So this is what our apple galettes look like. They taste even better than they look. You have that bottom layer of puff pastry, and then you have a thick layer of frangipane, which is a sweet almond cream, and then the thin slices of apples. So good. So we're going to actually make our own puff pastry. We're not going to make the classic. What we're going to make here is what is called a quick puff pastry, or commonly called a rough puff. It still has that wonderful buttery flavor of the classic, and it has the same texture, only because we make it a little differently, it doesn't rise as much, so it's not as high, so therefore it is not as light and flaky. But it is a really great pastry to make for things like this galette or tarts, or even if you like to put puff pastry on top of your pot pies. So a quick puff, unlike a classic puff pastry where you take dough and wrap it around a slab of butter and then you got to roll it, fold it, chill it, and many times, and this will take, a good part of your day. So this quick puff, it is a lot like a pie pastry. And that type of method, but we don't have to chill it in between our rolling and folding. But it's a lot more buttery than a pie pastry because the weight, it's equal weights flour and butter, and then we use half the weight of flour. It's kind of, or water, sorry. It's kind of an easy formula to remember. Now, if you don't want to, you just say, I can't make puff pastry. A lot of people, a little scared of making that, then you can use the commercially made puff pastry. And if you live in the States, you can buy that box. It's about, I think, a 17-ounce box of frozen puff pastry, and then you just defrost it overnight in the fridge. Or you just need about a pound of puff pastry, even if you want to use the classic. So, like I said, we're making this a lot like we would a pie pastry, only the butter is going to be left in larger chunks. So what I like to do either a couple hours before, or even, I often do it the night before, is take 1 cup, which is 225 grams of butter, and cut it into these large chunks. And then I just put on a plate, cover it with plastic wrap, and put it in the fridge because we want each chunk to be like really cold. And so what I also have is 225 grams of flour, all-purpose flour, which is 1 3/4 cups. And then I want to add some salt, a half a teaspoon, which is about 2 grams of salt. And then I'm just going to mix that. So then I'm just going to add my cubes of butter to my flour mixture. And then we're going to cut it in the butter into the flour. I like to use this pastry blender. It's such a handy tool. It's not very expensive and it does a great job. You could use 2 knives. Some people even like to do this step in their food processor. What you have to be careful of if you're using a food processor is we're going to cut the butter into the flour it's going to be in pretty large chunks, kind of like lima beans, which is close to like 1/2 inch, but 1 centimeter. So if you use your food processor, be very careful because, pie pastry, you have it into like coarse crumbs. That's not what we want. We want visible, big chunks of butter. So just cut it in. Okay, that looks good. As you can see, it's kind of a mess here of big chunks of butter in the flour. So that's what we're looking for. I know there's a tendency to keep, making the butter smaller, but don't. Resist that temptation. So now what we're going to do is add a 1/2 cup, 120 milliliters, which is about 115 grams. It's half the weight of the butter and the flour. And I'm just going to pour it over the top and have it like really cold water for this. We want to keep everything cold. And then I'm just going to stir this gently. We just want to moisten the flour. Now, you're not looking for a ball of dough here. You want, like, kind of looks just a rough mess. And we will sort that all out when we start rolling. It's a little bit different than a pie pastry that we kind of, you know, get to almost a dough form, like in a ball. So there it is. I mean, it's kind of a mess here. So I am just going to empty that right on to my counter. And then you will need a ruler, you will need your rolling pin, and one of these. It's called a bench scraper. It is perfect for this. I mean, you could use some kind of spatula, but it's worth the investment, and they're not very expensive. But a handy tool for this, because what we're going to do, we don't want to handle it too much. And as you can see, it's a real mess here. And we got to somehow get this into a long strip, because we're going to, you know, fold it. So I'm just going to start like that, and you will need some extra flour. We don't want to use too much flour, but we don't want it sticking. So I kind of just lightly pat that down, get that butter. And so what we're looking for is to roll it into, you want to kind of roll from the center outward into like a 16, about a 16, I mean, it's not that critical, 16 long by 6 wide. So that's 40 by 15 centimeters. So kind of, and as you can see all those nice flakes of butter. Now, if at any time when we're doing this, you start to see your butter really melt, then you will have to chill it. So just put on a baking sheet. But you want to use your bench scraper to, you know, constantly try to get that, form that into your rectangle. And it will fall apart this first time, this first rolling, and so don't panic. If your rolling pin gets some butter, just kind of rub it off. If you have to put a little flour, do that. So as you can see, I'm just kind of rolling it out till we get the required size. Okay, that looks pretty good, pretty rough. You kind of want it to be an even thickness, and make sure when you're rolling you don't roll too far off the ends and then make your ends thinner than the center. Now this one's going to be a little rough when we fold it. What we're going to do is fold each end into the center so it meets. Don't worry at this point if it's kind of falling apart like mine is, because we are going to roll and fold a few times. So we're doing what is called a double fold. Meet into the center, and then I'm going the furthest end away, I'm going to fold it up over itself, like that. And then just, it's like I said, this is rough puff, it's rough at this point. And then this end, which has the fold on it, we have to turn our dough. So I'm just going to lift, this is where the bench scraper comes in handy, and then I'm going to put some flour down here. We don't want it sticking like that. Our fold is on this side. So we want to do it every time we do it, we're going to fold it and turn it the same way. So now what we have is that we're going to again roll it into our 16 by 6 inch rectangle. That's 40 by 15 centimeters. And as you're rolling, like I said, again, roll from the center out. use your bench scraper, and periodically, especially at this point, you want to take your bench scraper and put it underneath to make sure that your pastry is not sticking to the counter, because then it's going to be awfully difficult to fold it. So just, and if you have to, move it a bit like that, put a little more flour down. So put that up as much, put a little flour over the top and my rolling pin, and I'm going to roll again from the center out. You can pat a bit. Don't worry if it's falling apart. You know, if it's not perfect, it takes a little bit of practice to get this right, but you know what? It's still going to taste great. No one will ever know when we're finished that you had a little difficulty. So. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm not sticking here and even up my sides. And we're going to fold again. So I'm taking the side furthest away into the center, even it up a little. This side, same thing. And then this side, fold it over. This is actually, I don't know whether I said, this is called a double fold. And then we have the seam side. And I'm going to turn that. Again, it's on my right-hand side. And we're going to do our final roll and fold. Now, if you found your pastry is extremely soft at this point, you could wrap it and just place it in the refrigerator for, you know, a half hour or so just to firm up that butter. I think I'm all right here to do it. And if your rolling pin gets messy, just kind of take some flour in your hand and just kind of, because you will get a little, the butter sticking a little bit. And as you can see, it's really starting to come together nice. You get a little sticky, a little bit of stickiness on the top of your dough, just put a little flour on there. Okay, that looks about right. We got it kind of evened up. If you have to, if you don't think it's wide enough, you could roll a bit this way, but try to mainly roll the long way and then even up. And have a nice rectangle, about the same thickness, and we're going to do our one more. As you can see, this is a lot nicer dough. It looks like a puff pastry now. Even it up nice. And then fold it over on ourselves, and we have our quick puff. Not too bad, I think. And the thing is, if it's not perfect, what you will find, it's still going to taste great. So now what we have is our puff pastry. I like to, at this point, divide it into half because we're going to make altogether 12 individual galettes. And it's easier to roll out a smaller amount of puff, 6 on each one. So I'm going to just eyeball. You could weigh this, but I'm going to eyeball it. I'm just using my bench scraper to cut down. You could use a large knife. I have my 2, you can see, nice. 2 pieces of puff. Now at this point we're going to wrap them in plastic wrap and chill them for a few hours because we want that butter to firm up in our pastry. You could leave it in the fridge up to 3 days. So, you know, you could do the puff pastry one day and then, you know, tomorrow or the next day you could make your galettes. Or you could even place this into the freezer for 2-3 months. So then you can just easily, whenever you want to make your galettes or tarts or the top for your pot pie, just take it out of the freezer the night before, and the next day just roll it out. So when we come back, we will make our frangipane. So now we're going to make our frangipane, which is an almond cream. It's nice and thick, perfect for spreading on our pastry. So the first thing, I'm just going to do it in my food processor. It makes it really fast and easy. So we need to start with a half a cup, 60 grams. I'm using blanched almonds. And I'm using the the slivers, you could use like slices, you could even use whole almonds. And then just put that in your food processor. Now we need to process these until they're finely grind. And in order, you know, there is a tendency when you use a food processor to overdo it, and then you can get a paste of your almonds. So what I'm going to do is add 1 tablespoon, 10 grams of just all-purpose plain flour. And I'm just going to process until our almonds are finely ground. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's finely ground. I mean, you could buy the almonds done that way, finely ground almonds or almond meal. You could do that and just use a half a cup. And then all I'm going to do now is add the rest of my ingredients. So I need 1/4 cup, 50 grams of granulated white sugar, 1 large egg, have your egg at room temperature, and 1/4 cup, 4 tablespoons or 55 grams of butter. And you want your butter quite soft because we're going to mix it all in there. So I always chop it into small pieces because it just mixes in a lot easier than putting a large chunk of butter in there. And then just a teaspoon or just a pinch of salt, which would be 1/8 of a teaspoon. And a little bit of almond extract, half a teaspoon, or sorry, I think I said almond, that's vanilla. And then I'm just going to process this until it's nice, all mixed together, nice and thick. That looks pretty good. Just going to give it a quick stir. And that looks good. Now I find I like to cover and chill this just a bit because we are going to spread it on our puff pastry, and if it's a little thicker, then it spreads easier. So I'm just going to put it in a bowl, cover it, and put it in the fridge just a little, you know, a little bit. And when we come back, we will roll out our puff pastry. So now we're ready to roll out our puff pastry. I'm taking one of our squares, which about 1/2 pound, 225 grams of puff pastry. Now, if you were using the commercially made, the one that comes in the 2 sheets, it's already done. It's already in, each sheet is already in 3 separate kind of layers that are joined, or rectangles I should say. So really all you have to do is cut that into 3 and then right across, because we're going to make 6 galettes here. So what we're going to do, if you've made your quick puff, is we're going to roll this into a 9-inch square, 23 centimeter. So this is, I've taken this right, it's cold right out of the fridge. So what I like to do, we've got to soften it just a bit. I'm just going to bang it. Kind of get it going. And then we're going to just roll it. Now have your surface lightly floured, and you know, flour your rolling pin as needed. That butter is nice and hard, so we gotta soften it just a bit as we roll and keep turning. And you know, if you need to add a little extra flour, do so. Okay, that looks about right. So I have my trusty ruler here. Now I rolled it a little more than 9 inches or 23 centimeters, because what I want to do is even up my edges. So with the sharp knife, just kind of cut down, don't kind of like a rocking motion with your knife, and cut off those ends, nice and even. And then we're going to cut this into 3. Looks good. So you could use your, I'm just going to try eyeballing this. or you can get your ruler out and make it very precise, but you know, it's kind of homemade, so everything doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And then I'm just going to cut it in half. And then you will need a parchment lined baking sheet, or you could just butter your baking sheet or spray it with one of those non-stick sprays. And because we did soften our puff just a little, and I want it a little firmer when we spread on our frangipane. So I'm just going to put it on here, cover, and I'm going to actually put these into the freezer for about, you know, maybe 10, 15 minutes. I mean, if you have a lot more time, you could just put it in the refrigerator until they firm up. And then that way, spreading the cream will be really easy. And when we come back, we will spread our frangipane on our puff pastry. Okay, so our puff pastry is nice and firm. So now what I'm going to do is take, you know, roughly a spoonful, about, you know, a tablespoon maybe. What we're looking for is just a layer of the frangipane, you know, and then you want to leave, you know, about maybe a 1/4 of an inch border around the outside, about that's about maybe 1/2 centimeter, because otherwise, when the puff pastry it bakes, when our galettes bake, you don't want that cream kind of spilling over the sides, which I mean it sometimes does, but we can try to prevent that by not spreading it too close to the edge. So there, you just want a nice layer, and just do that for all of them. This is enough. We've made enough frangipane for 12 galettes. I mean, I'm only making 6 here, but you could take that other half of our puff and roll that out if you want lots. Okay, that looks good. So what I'm going to do now is just cover these and put them back into the refrigerator just to chill again, keep that puff pastry nice and cold. And when we come back, we're going to prepare our apples. And also preheat your oven now to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 200 degrees Celsius. So now for our apples. You will need, for every 6 galettes, you will need about 1 pound of apples, which is 450 grams. You want a firm textured apple that holds its shape when it's baked. I'm using a Granny Smith. And so we want to cut it and slice it. So I just cut straight down like that, and then I do a straight cut on either side of the core and across the back. And then I just take a paring knife and I just peel it. And I've already done that. And then we're just going to slice it, you know, thin slices. And just put in the bowl. So I'm going to just sweeten, you know, depending on how tart your apples are. My Granny Smith are quite tart, so I have about, you know, a little over a tablespoon, about 15 grams of granny laid white sugar. And then I'm going to add like just a pinch of ground cinnamon, 1/8 of a teaspoon. You could add more or less. You don't have to add the cinnamon if you would prefer not to have that flavor. And then just toss that. And actually, I'm just going to use my fingers. And then what we're going to do now is we have our puff pastry. And I just take these slices, and I like to do it like diagonally this way. And we're just going to overlap our slices of apple like so. Okay, that looks about right. So now what we're going to do is bake them in our oven for somewhere between like 18-20 minutes. So again, everybody's oven is different, until the puff is risen. It's nice golden brown both on the sides and on the bottom, and our apples are nice and tender. Okay, don't our apple galettes look beautiful. As you can see, you get nice golden brown around the edges, and they're golden brown. It's on the bottom. So now if you wanted to, you could sprinkle a little powdered sugar on the apples and then place it under your galettes under the broiler, or if you had a hand torch, to caramelize the edges of your apples. Really, I'm not going to bother doing that step here. So what I'm going to do is just let these cool, and when we come back, we will try one. So now, if you want to serve your galette, you can put a little powdered sugar over the top. They're very good on their own, or with a little scoop of vanilla ice cream, or even whipped cream if you want to take it over the top. We're just going to enjoy it just as it is. If you have never made your own puff pastry, really, you have to try a quick puff. It's really forgiving pastry, but you can't beat that really buttery flavor and that crisp and flaky texture. I mean, it's just wonderful. And then you top that with the almond cream and apples. It's a wonderful dessert. Your family will love it, and if you're serving it to guests, they will also love it. So enjoy, and until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Pretty good.